what drives what size contract a contracting officer can work on. A contracting officer is responsible for accepting your products and services. But let's say, for example, your products, let's say I'm in Crystal City, Virginia, and I'm your contracting officer. And anything that comes into Crystal City, I can accept right there and then, not an issue. But let's say the contract also has to be performed out in San Diego and Norfolk. I can't be in all those places. So I can take part of my warrant through agency and assign it to another government employee. And that other government employee is called a contracting officer representative. And we'll talk about the differences between a CO and a COR later, but for purposes of this contracts discussion, understand that as a contracting officer, I can take part of my responsibility and assign it to somebody else. But that other person has to accept it and be very clear about the specific boundaries I have given them. So I might say that the person can accept deliverables. I might say that the person can answer any questions that come up in San Diego that don't require contract changes. I can say that the contracting officer representative can manage all the government equipment. Whatever specific responsibilities, I'm basically making that core an agent of me as the contracting officer. Everybody good there? You guys aren't asking me enough questions, so I'm not able to drink as much water as I'm supposed to be drinking today. So get with the program for my health. A principal can also approve the unauthorized actions if an agent of an agent and thereby create an agency relationship. Okay, so there's this issue called actual authority and apparent authority. Let me talk about it in the case of the government. So there's two different authorities in the government, actual authority and apparent authority. So the example we just talked about, actual authority is when the contracting officer calls my contracts person or calls me as the CEO of the company or me as the program manager and says, we, the government, want to institute a change. That's actual authority. They have the authority to actually get that change accomplished. If Stephanie's the contracting officer representative and she issues me a change order, she has apparent authority, but not actual authority. So she's the only one I deal with in the government. So in my head, she is the government. That's why it's apparent authority. But she doesn't have actual authority to change anything. So in the case where, let's go back to the painting the room spa green. So I went ahead and painted the room spa green. And guess what else I did? I submitted an invoice because I want to be paid for the fact that I bought all that new paint and I brought in all my painters, in overtime to paint this room. We now have a problem because I'm going to submit that invoice and Stephanie's not going to be able to accept it because what I'm delivering is a second paint job and turquoise paint, spa green paint. And she's going to have to either decide that spa green was in the best interest of the government. She's not deciding this, her contracting officer is deciding this. Okay, a mistake's been made. I thought that she had authority to do it, she did not. Now the government has to decide, do we have justification to ratify the contract to act as though painting it spa green was what was intended all along. So basically it's, and in order to do that, before my taxpayer gets upset, before we do that, the government has to justify that it's in the best interest of the government that it's painted spa green. Okay, so that's what the process of ratification is, where you take an illegal contract action and you make it legal through this process. So this includes a duty to act in the principal's best interest, a duty of good conduct, a duty to keep the principal informed, and a duty to act only as authorized, and a duty to be loyal to the principal. So in the case of my sister and her husband using an agent, if I said to the agent, you know, they're charging me this, but I only want to pay this, will you agree to that? They would be violating these things because they are an agent of my sister and her husband, and it wouldn't be in their best interest for me to pay less than what we had already agreed. So you have to act in the principal's best interest. You have a duty of good conduct, so the agent just can't be willy-nilly making decisions. A duty to keep the principal informed. If I said I want to pay a lower price, the agent would have to call my sister and say, she's proposing this, are you willing to do that? And get agreement back that it's authorized, that that action is authorized, and then a duty of loyalty to the principal. So as a contracting officer representative, when you get that warrant, you need to act in the government's best interest because you're a representative of the government. You have a duty to good conduct. In other words, you can't give one company an unfair advantage over another. You have a duty to keep your principal informed. In this case, your principal would be the contracting officer, and then to only act within the confines of your warrant. Now, what makes me nervous as a taxpayer, and it should make a lot of government contracting officer representatives nervous, is there is supposed to be a delegate, by law, there's supposed to be a delegation of procurement authority letter that basically says, I'm the contracting officer, I'm making Stephanie the core, and these are the specific things I'm giving her the authority to do. Oftentimes that process doesn't happen. So what happens is Stephanie is now confused as to what she's allowed to do and not allowed to do. You're a contractor working for Stephanie, you're confused as to what she can do and what she can't do. And so this whole idea of apparent authority versus actual authority becomes a freaking nightmare. So what I always tell cores to do, because I teach core classes, I teach cores to take that letter, and as soon as you win a contract with them, to show you what their delegation letter looks like. Because guess what? If they show you that delegation letter, you now know exactly what they can and can't do, so you won't have any issues of apparent versus actual authority. And you as contractors, when you start working with your core, it is perfectly acceptable to say, I would like a copy of your core delegation letter, so that you know exactly what they can do and what they can't do. This is a case where I pity cores, because cores that don't know any better can legally go to jail for things that they do as a core and not even have knowledge that they're breaking the law because they don't have this delegation letter.
Could you repeat one more time what document you said we need to try to request?
Delegation letter. So it's basically the letter that the contracting officer gives to the core that outlines all their responsibilities. Okay, so how is an independent contractor different than an agent? An independent contractor contracts to do a piece of work using his or her own methods without being subjected to the other party to the contract. So where this plays out in the government space is it's called professional services, or I'm sorry, personal services. The government cannot require you to do personal services. So if you and I have entered into, I'm the government, you're a contractor, you and I have entered into a contract, and you are supposed to provide help desk support, and you need to have somebody there from 8 to 5 every day, and you need to answer phones within the first 3 rings, and you need to have a second line of problem resolution, and you need to do all these requirements. That's what our contract says. As the government, I can walk in and sort of just listen to the phone's ringing and listen to see if I hear it 3 times or more. I can listen to see if you didn't know the answer, if you referred to a second line for problem resolution. What I can't do is say, you know, have you thought about putting this one phone call on hold for a minute while you're in to make sure you get that 3rd ring here? And have you considered bringing in additional people? And you know, Joe over there really doesn't know their job. They don't seem to know when to pass it on to second line. Can you fix that? If the government starts giving me all that direction as if I worked directly for the government, not as a contractor, that bridges the gap of personal services. The government can't do that. They can ensure that I hold up my end of the contract, that I'm not in breach of the contract, but they can't tell me how to do the specific things that I'm doing, because that's more of a manager-employee relationship, not a government to contractor, this notion of an independent contractor. Everybody with me now? The independent contractor's only concern is that they provide an acceptable product or service. So as long as I'm meeting all the contractual requirements, you really shouldn't have much to say to me, you the government. But if I'm not meeting the requirements, you still don't have anything to say to me, the person working on site. Your contracting officer goes to the company's contracting officer, contract manager, and works the issue out there. Government says, hey, your employee isn't answering the phones within 3 rings. It doesn't appear like Joe knows what he's doing at all, and your second line help desk support isn't working. Those are 3 contractual issues where the contractor is in breach of the contract. And there are contractual remedies, like the government could issue a stop work order, or they could not pay the contractor. So there are legal ramifications when I don't perform the contract. But the government can't get up all in my face and say, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. Understand the difference there? The primary distinction between an agent, so think about the case of my sister and her husband hiring an agent to represent them in a real estate transaction. My sister and her husband told them exactly what they had authority to do and what they didn't have authority to do, and how that's different than an independent contractor. Basically, it's the amount of control that's placed over each. My sister and husband had very tight control over their agent because they wanted to make sure the agent has more control over what they were required to do. 2 types of agents. A general agent can transact all the business of the principal or all of the principal's business of a particular kind or in a particular place. So think about living will, where you give authority to somebody to decide whether they should pull the plug on you. That's an example of a type of agency. Special agent can only act in a special transaction for a specific, particular purpose or class of work. So, somebody who's identified as an agent in a living will doesn't have the right to kill you if you're up and running around, but they do have the opportunity, because you've given it to them in a very special circumstances, if oxygen isn't getting to your brain, if your heart isn't pumping, if you aren't eating, and if you ever looked at a living will, there's a whole lot of detail as to the very specific instructions that you're giving that agent to be able to perform that. They have it in that particular context with those specific requirements. They don't have the authority to just go off. You know what I'm saying? So 2 different types of agency there. So here's an example. An agent might be somebody like a chauffeur. A chauffeur is under the control of the employer. They fill the limousine with gas, they charge the employer for that gas, if they get a ticket, the employer pays the ticket. If they have an accident, the employer is liable. Anybody ever watch Suits? The girl, what's her name, Meghan Markle show before she became princess?
Yeah.
Law show. Yeah. Huh?
Kind of bring up the show, the Michaels, or the whole thing.
Oh, yeah, when she became princess. Yeah, how dare her.
Seasons if they quit.
What I got a kick out of was, they'd done the show for 8 or 9 years, and it was her birthday, and just as a friend, he just posted something funny on Facebook, and apparently got the royals all upset. But there was an incident where the main character, who's not Mike, who's the other one? Harvey, where he was being chauffeured someplace, and the chauffeur got into an accident, and it was Harvey's responsibility because of the agent responsibility. A taxi driver or an Uber driver is only paid only to take fare to a particular location. So to take you from here to there, you get paid for that. They fill the taxi with gas on their own, and they're responsible for the cost of that. If they get a ticket, they have to pay it themselves. If they get an accident, we as Uber drivees, we're not going to get hit with any of that, right? Because it's a different, it's not, it's an agent versus a contractor. Okay. So agents can only be given actual authority. So if my sister and her husband had come back in the middle of the closing and tried to start signing documents on their own and finishing up all the last touches, in order for them to do that, they would have had to cancel the agency relationship with the current agent, taken authority back from her so that they own it, and then they could do whatever they needed to do. So they could terminate that agency agreement at any time, but they would have to pull it back because at the moment, the agent had responsibility. So there's two types of actual authority. The first one is express authority, and it's conferred in direct terms, very definitively and explicitly. So when the CO has after they finish CO school and they go back and work on the job for a while and the agency decides to grant them a warrant, they get a formal letter that says you are now authorized with explicit authority, express authority to negotiate contracts up to $1 million. They can't do it a minute before. Implied authority is conferred by inference. So if a core is given express authority to authorize payment of invoices, he or she is given implied authority to return improper invoices for correction. So just because I'm the contracting officer and I tell Stephanie she can approve invoices, doesn't negate her from taking an invoice from you that should be $10,000 and ends up being $100,000, because she still has a responsibility because it's inferred that she's supposed to be doing these invoices, acting for me in the best interests of the government, that you should be getting charged for $10,000, not $100,000. So that would be an example where implied authority is conferred by inference. Apparent authority, which is different than actual authority, is authority perceived by a third party. So in this case, if I'm a contractor and Stephanie's the contracting officer representative, I'm assuming, because she's the only one I've ever met in the government, that she can tell me what to do. The fact that she walked in and mentioned the spa green thing, I took that as actual authority, but really she only had apparent authority because she can't change the contract as a core.
Would that kind of mistake be reflected on past performance as well? Like, I mean, if you just tried to do something that you thought there was actual authority, but it was actually apparent authority and then there caused discrepancy there, I mean.
Yeah. So there's, just like in your business, there are honest business people. And if you make a mistake, you can honestly say to the other person, I made a mistake and let's figure out how to fix it. And if they made a mistake, they can honestly say to you, I made a mistake and fix it. Or, I made a mistake, but I'm going to blame you to make it look like it's your fault. Or you made a mistake and you're going to blame me. And the same thing happens in the government community, right? So, as a federal contractor, I need to understand this concept. And I will tell you, most contractors don't. Because most contractors don't get classes like this. They get lured into the big dollars and, oh, I'm going to get me some of them and just go full steam ahead. And like I said, don't even look at the entire RFP and just put these proposals together without really having a clear idea what they're doing. And then they think they're going to just learn it on the fly. And the way they normally learn it on the fly is that they make mistakes, they get penalized, and it ends up costing a lot more money and could potentially take their business under. Look at the case of AUI. So I also warn my contracting officer and core friends to say to them, hey, there are some shady contractors out there who might be trying to mess with you. They may have underbid it and once they started working the contract really